Number 10. Ford Pinto. The Ford Pinto completed its first full model year in 1971, having been introduced in September 1970 as a 1971 model at a base price of $1,919, positioned as Ford's domestic answer to the Volkswagen Beetle and the growing import market that the Beetle's American sales success had established as permanent. It sold 352,402 units in its first full year, demonstrating that the domestic subcompact market Ford had dismissed as temporary was large enough to sustain a dedicated model at the bottom of the Ford lineup. Its 1.6 or 2.0-liter four-cylinder, its hatchback and sedan configurations, and its price below every other Ford in the showroom gave the young American buyer who needed personal transportation and had a limited budget the domestic answer at the domestic dealer that the Beetle had been providing from the import side. The internal engineering documents that would later become the focus of litigation and the subject of the 1977 Mother Jones investigation existed in some form in 1971. None of this was publicly available. In 1971, the Pinto was simply the affordable Ford that young Americans bought. The car is at number 10 because 352,402 Americans chose it in its first full model year without knowledge of the conversations that Ford's engineers were having or would have about its fuel system. And because the first full year of the most controversial American car of the decade placed it among the most purchased domestic subcompacts in the country. Number 9. Volkswagen Beetle. The Volkswagen Beetle in 1971 was approaching the peak of its American commercial presence, selling in the range of 400,000 units annually in the American market, more than any single import nameplate had achieved before it, on an argument that had not changed since 1949, that reliability, economy, and a price accessible to the first-time buyer outweighed the horsepower, the chrome, and the annual styling changes that Detroit had decided were the primary commercial variables. Its 60-horsepower air-cooled engine, its absence of a water cooling system, and its mechanical simplicity that any competent shop in any American city could address gave the Beetle buyer the documented ownership cost that the Chevrolet Vega, introduced the year before as the domestic response, was simultaneously failing to match in its early service records. The Beetle in 1971 was still the car that the American counterculture had adopted as its visual shorthand for the values that the muscle car represented the opposite of. It appeared in the Herbie films. It was the car that the Volkswagen Think Small campaign had taught Americans to see differently. The Beetle is at number 9 because approximately 400,000 Americans chose the German car with no coolant, no tail fins, no V8, and no ambiguity about what it was, and because the gap between what the Beetle offered and what the Vega was attempting to offer was being documented in dealer service records across the country. Number 8. Chevrolet Vega. The Chevrolet Vega won Motor Trend's Car of the Year for 1971, and at the time it was given, that award was not fraudulent. The Vega was a legitimate engineering achievement. Its aluminum block overhead cam engine was technically sophisticated, and the car's styling, shaped by Bill Mitchell's team, was widely recognized as the best-looking American compact in its price range. Motor Trend's editors made the award on the basis of what the Vega was when new, and that basis was correct. The problem that would define the Vega's legacy was what it became after approximately 50,000 miles, when the aluminum block's thermal expansion, greater than the cast-iron head it was paired with, began compromising the head gasket in ways the warranty covered and the service records documented with increasing frequency through 1972 and 1973. In 1971, the Vega was selling in six-figure volumes to Americans who had read the Motor Trend Award and had every reasonable expectation that a General Motors product with a recognized engineering achievement under the hood would deliver on that promise. Number 7. The Ford Maverick. The Ford Maverick had debuted in April 1969 as a 1970 model, Ford's simple machine answer to the growing import market at a base price of $1,995 that positioned it as the practical compact above the subcompact Pinto's $1,919 entry point, filling the compact slot the Falcon had vacated. It sold 238,702 units in 1971. For 1971, Ford expanded the lineup with a new four-door sedan configuration and added an optional 302 cubic inch V8 alongside the sporty Grabber package with its distinctive hood treatment and tape stripes that gave buyers the visual argument at a compact price that the base car's purposeful plainness declined to provide. Its 17 cubic inch inline-six in standard configuration, its simple rear-wheel drive layout, and its mechanical accessibility to any shop in any American county gave the Maverick buyer the practical compact argument that the Pinto was making at subcompact dimensions. Ford sold it to buyers who needed the compact answer, more room than the Pinto, less commitment than the Torino from the Ford dealer they had already been using. The Maverick is at number 7 because 238,702 Americans chose it in 1971 as the compact Ford that addressed the practical transportation problem without the subcompact dimensional limitations, and because the car that positioned itself between the Pinto and the midsize Torino found in that gap a market that no previous Ford product had specifically served.
Number 6. Pontiac Firebird. The Pontiac Firebird had been completely redesigned for 1970, the second-generation car with a more sculptural body, a dramatically lower roofline, and the performance credentials that Pontiac had been building since the Firebird's 1967 introduction. By 1971, the Trans Am variant, with its shaker hood scoop, its 455 HO engine option, and the performance package that would make it the most culturally dominant American car of the late 1970s, was available to any buyer who could absorb the insurance premium that the specification produced. The Firebird's Formula and Trans Am configurations gave performance buyers in 1971 alternatives to the Camaro that were both mechanically credentialed and visually distinctive in ways the Camaro did not match. The 1971 Firebird's 455 cubic inch V8 option represented the muscle car at the precise moment when emissions requirements and insurance economics were beginning to reduce the availability of genuine performance at prices the young buyer could reach. The Firebird is at number 6 because in 1971, the car that would outsell the Camaro in 1979 was already building the performance reputation that Smokey and the Bandit would convert into cultural dominance, and because the second-generation body that defined the Trans Am's visual identity was already in 1971 one of the most recognized performance silhouettes in American automotive history. Number 5. Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The Chevrolet Monte Carlo entered its second model year in 1971 as the personal luxury coupe that General Motors had introduced to compete with the Ford Thunderbird and the Pontiac Grand Prix, a mid-size A-body platform with a long hood, a formal roofline, and the personal luxury positioning that American buyers were demonstrating they would pay for at Chevrolet prices. Its 350 or 454 cubic inch V8 options, its bucket seat interior with the center console, and its price positioned between the Chevelle and the full-size Impala gave the Chevrolet dealer a product that the buyer who wanted the personal luxury experience without a full-size car's fuel cost could choose without leaving the showroom or the Chevrolet brand entirely. The Monte Carlo sold over 130,000 units in 1971, not yet the commercial force it would become after the Colonnade redesign of 1973, but already establishing the personal luxury Chevrolet positioning that the A-body platform made possible at a price the full-size luxury buyer could reach from below without yet committing to the full-size purchase. The Monte Carlo is at number 5 because in its second year, Chevrolet's personal luxury coupe demonstrated the market was genuinely large enough for a Chevrolet-priced entry, and because the car whose Colonnade era would produce 350,000 unit years beginning in 1973 was, in 1971, building the commercial foundation that made those years inevitable. Number 4. Chevrolet Chevelle. The Chevrolet Chevelle in 1971 was entering the final phase of the classic A-body configuration that Chevrolet had carried since 1964, 2 years before the Colonnade redesign of 1973 that would change its proportions and redirect the nameplate towards personal luxury.
In 1971, General Motors mandated lower compression ratios across all divisions to prepare for unleaded. The LS6 was canceled. The Chevelle SS soldiered on with the LS5 454 cubic inch big block, now at 8.5 to 1 compression and 365 gross horsepower, through a new front end featuring single headlamps that distinguished the 1971 body from the 1970. Total Chevelle production in 1971 placed it among the most purchased mid-size cars in the country. The last years of the classic A-body were the last years the buyer could order the Chevelle in the configuration that 8 years of production had established as definitive, before the Colonnade's formal roofline redirected the conversation from performance to personal luxury. The Chevelle is at number 4 because the buyers who understood the redesign was approaching chose the known configuration in the farewell year pattern, and because the 1971 Chevelle SS with its LS5 454 and its new single headlamp front end represented the twilight of the classic mid-size muscle car argument that emissions requirements and insurance economics would not allow to be made with the same directness in 1972 or 1973. Number 3. Plymouth Duster. The Plymouth Duster in 1971 was at or near the peak of its commercial run. The A-body compact fastback that Plymouth had introduced in 1970 on the Valiant platform, with the 225 cubic inch slant 6 that Chrysler had been inclining 30 degrees from vertical since 1960, and at a price that the compact buyer in 1971 could reach without the financing conversation that the muscle car's insurance premium had made the dominant variable in any performance car purchase. The Duster sold over 242,000 units in 1971 as the compact Plymouth that gave the Dodge dealers slant 6 argument a fastback and a price point that young Americans found accessible and that parents found defensible. Its Duster 340 package with the 340 cubic inch V8 and the performance suspension gave the buyer who wanted the muscle car experience without the muscle car insurance penalty a documented quarter-mile credential at a compact price. The standard Slant 6 gave the buyer who needed economy and nothing else the same engine that Chrysler had been proving reliable since 1960. The Duster is at number 3 because over 242,000 Americans in 1971 chose the compact Plymouth that solved the young buyer's transportation problem and, in the 340 configuration, offered more performance per dollar than anything else in the showroom. And because the car that answered both questions simultaneously was, in 1971, the correct compact answer for both kinds of buyer.
Number 2. Chevrolet Impala. The Chevrolet Impala in 1971 was still the most purchased passenger car in the United States, in absolute volume, by total units sold, by every metric that a sales chart measures. But the margin that had made the Impala's dominance feel permanent in 1965 and 1966, when it sold more than 1 million copies in consecutive years, had been narrowing since 1967. In 1971, the Impala sold in the high 6 figures, a figure that remained larger than any other single passenger car model in the country, but that was being approached by the Oldsmobile Cutlass at a rate that the GM sales division could observe in quarterly reports. The buyer who chose it in 1971 was making the same practical decision that more than 1 million Americans had made in 1965. The full-size Chevrolet at the Chevrolet price from the Chevrolet dealer that served their county. Its 350 or 400 cubic inch V8 options, its 6-passenger interior, and the mechanical reliability that a decade of Impala ownership across every American community had documented gave the buyer in 1971 the same answer the Impala had been providing since the early 1960s. The Impala is at number 2 because in 1971, the most purchased passenger car in America was still the full-size Chevrolet. But for the first time in a decade,
The car selling in the showroom next door was growing toward it at a rate that made the Impala's reign feel, for the first time, temporary.
Number 1. Oldsmobile Cutlass. The Oldsmobile Cutlass in 1971 was the car that would be the best-selling passenger car in the United States in 1975, 1976, and 1977. And in 1971, that outcome was not yet obvious to anyone who was not reading the sales trend data with attention. Its Colonnade A-body platform would arrive with the 1973 redesign. Its personal luxury positioning would be confirmed by 1975. In 1971, the Cutlass was growing its sales figures in the midsize segment with the 350 or 455 cubic inch V8 options and the personal luxury coupe configuration that its buyers were beginning to prefer to the full-size Oldsmobile Delta 88's larger, less economical proposition. It was selling in the range of 350,000 units, a figure that the Impala's total still exceeded, but that the quarterly trend lines were resolving in the Cutlass's direction. The 1971 Cutlass's 444 package with the 455 cubic inch V8 and the performance suspension gave performance buyers a credential. Its Supreme configuration gave the buyer moving from the muscle car toward personal luxury exactly the mid-size Oldsmobile that fit between the Delta 88 and the Toronado. The Cutlass is at number 1 because in 1971, the car that would lead America in passenger car sales within 4 years was already in the top 3. And because the car that would outsell the Impala by 1975 was being purchased in 1971 by buyers who had no knowledge they were choosing next decade's most commercially dominant nameplate.